I'm going to begin by talking a little bit about the purpose of today's panel. So first, I'd like to thank all of our panelists for being here with us today. Let's give them a warm welcome. Okay, and again, the purpose of today's panel is to provide you all with an opportunity to learn about current work and policies that look to address specific issues or trends impacting the community of Oakland today. And so we also would like you to consider how these practices and policies are connected to current events such as violence in the community, access to quality education, and police-community relations. And now Alex is going to tell us a little bit about the format of today's panel.
Sure. Okay, so we'll start by introducing each of our panelists and give them a chance to tell you a little bit about who they are and where they're joining us from today. And then we'll go into our opening round of questions. Sam and I will facilitate the first couple rounds of questions. We'll ask each panelist a specific question related to their work or a specific issue or trend that maybe their work focuses on. And then in the second round, we will kind of broaden our scope and ask the panel in general more about some of the topics that arose in our first round of conversation, or first round of questions, and kind of dive a little bit deeper into some of the systems or institutions that perpetuate some of those issues or trends in the community. And then at that point, after that round, we'll open it up to you all to ask questions. We'll do about 30 minutes of open Q&A. So as you guys are listening to the first round and you have the bios in front of you, feel free to think about other questions that you may want to ask, and you'll have a chance to do that. And then after that, we'll bring it back and we'll kind of ask one final question to each panelist and close out our panel for the afternoon. Okay, great. So first, we're going to introduce each guest.
Yes. So our first guest is Malia Ramler. Welcome. Malia joins us from First 5 Alameda County, and we're hoping you can take the next 2 minutes to share with us what First 5 is and what your role is within the organization, and also feel free to add anything else that you'd like us to know about you and your work.
Great, thank you. It's so nice to be here today, and I just want to start by thanking all of you for your commitment to service and the work that you've been doing with young children in the community over the past year. How many of you have ever heard of First 5 California? So quite a few of you. So every county in California has something called First 5. I'm with First 5 Alameda County. And here in California, in 1998, we passed a piece of legislation that was called at the time Proposition 10. And it added 50 cents to the price of every pack of cigarettes. And the revenue that came from that 50 cents per pack of cigarettes was to focus on early childhood development and family support, with the goal of making sure that all of California's children entered kindergarten healthy and ready to learn. And I want you to take a guess. How much revenue do you think 50 cents per pack of cigarettes raises, roughly, in California?
In how long of a time?
In a year. 2 million? 3 million. Okay, we smoke more than you think. In 13-14, that raised about $430 million in the state of California. If you don't smoke, don't start. If you do smoke, thank you very much. That's a really weird way we're supporting child development in California. First 5 Alameda County's mission is to make sure that every child has the opportunity to reach their full developmental potential, and we do that by supporting families and institutions that support families from birth to 5 years of age, supporting quality early learning environments, and increasing the reach of early intervention for developmental concerns. So what you all are doing in Jumpstart and in your classrooms is very close to our hearts. I am an Oakland resident. I wasn't raised in Oakland, but I raised my children in Oakland, and they were Oakland Public School graduates and Cal alum. Go Bears! Bears out there.
Thank you so much, Malia. Our next guest is Pastor Dominique Gilliard. Welcome. Pastor Gilliard, can you share the different ways you're involved with the church and the community? And again, feel free to add anything else you'd like us to know about you.
Yeah, well, good afternoon, everybody. I am a pastor of a church in the Fruitvale district of Oakland, California, and in addition to pastoring, I do a lot of community development work. I lecture across the country talking about issues ranging from mass incarceration to social justice to what biblically based community development looks like. And in addition to that, in my local context, our church we've adopted a school, and so we work very closely with the school. A lot of schools in Oakland, unfortunately, fall into the under-resourced category, so I know. And my previous pastorate, we partnered with the school that had to close its library down because they couldn't afford to pay for librarians. And so what we would do is we would have congregants who would volunteer as library staff that allowed the school to be able to reopen their library. And so that speaks profoundly to what is at the heart of a lot of what you're here for, trying to figure out how we can bridge the gaps that exist and allow all kids to have access to quality education. And so a lot of my work is really focused around building bridges and like pointing out blind spots that exist, and then helping to mobilize people to step into those blind spots, and so that we can be the people who can be the change that we want to see in our communities, and to really believe and empower youth who society might not expect a lot of, their community might not really emphasize certain things, to help them realize that they have potential and then help them to actualize that potential.
Awesome, thank you so much. Our next guest is Brandon Sturdivant. Welcome. Brandon joins us from OCO. Can you tell us a little bit about OCO and the ways that you're involved in that organization? And again, anything else you'd like to share?
Thank you. So again, Brandon Sturdivant. I'm with the Oakland Community Organizations. We're part of the PICO network, People Improving Communities Through Organizing. Who knows what a community organizer is? Somebody knows. What do community organizers do?
They organize your communities like around issues of social justice and like trying to maybe like rallies and things like that to bring attention to certain topics.
That's good. That's good. Usually people say you just go to meetings and have coffee. But community organizing really is about relationship building. And as a faith-based community organizer, what I do is I help folks channel self-interest, looking at the social ills of their community, and focus on changing the real as we experience it to the ideal. What that looks like is going into faith-based institutions and helping people through one-to-ones, and moving to research and action, and basically holding policymakers and systems accountable. And chiefly our work at Oakland Community Organizations right now through our 60+ faith-based institutions, and our we have quite a few members, 20, 30, 40, 50,000, depending on the issue that we're working on. It's really about stopping the criminalization of Black and brown men right now. That's our big issue. It's called Live Free, and I'll get into that a little bit later.
Thank you. And our final guest is Captain Armstrong. He was just promoted yesterday. Congratulations. So welcome, Captain, and with OPD. That wasn't obvious. Can you share with us a little bit about your current role within the police department?
So again, like you said, thank you guys for the hand clap. I'm excited about the promotion. And I apologize for being a little late. My new job is a lot of work, so I'm just getting used to it. But my job currently is the commander of Youth and Family Services. I handle all of the programs in Oakland related to young people. We have an Our Kids program, we have a Oakland PAL program, as well as I'm the ceasefire liaison to the community. So I work closely with Brandon and community advocacy groups, as well as I'm the lead instructor for procedural justice and police legitimacy training, which is, if you've ever heard of the new report that was just pushed out by the White House 21st Century report on policing. That was a part of that plan that the president set forth to really address some of the issues that law enforcement is having when it comes to police brutality, especially when it comes to African American and minority men. So I teach that to all the Oakland police officers. I think now I've taught 700. We have the only comprehensive program in America that has a community component. A little bit about me, if I would say, I was born and raised in Oakland. I'm a graduate of McClymonds High School. Yeah, woo for real. High school in the city. So it's always unique to sit in this position because where I grew up deep in West Oakland, in what they call the lower bottoms, which was gang infested, very violent. You never would have ever thought that you would sit in a seat as a police officer and be able to talk about this. And so I've never met an African American police officer when I grew up that I actually had a relationship with. So one of the things I've really invested in is trying to create relationships between our community and especially young people. So one of my passions within my program is a program that I have called our school safety program, which is 25 police officers that work directly in 6 schools in Oakland, and their job is not to do policing on campuses. Their job is to do direct relationship building. Oakland police officers have a tremendous responsibility with growing their relationships with their community. We take that seriously. I've led that effort for several years, and so we're doing something that's not being done throughout the country, which is really taking the former, some of you that's in high school might have heard of the SRO program, the School Resource Officer on Campus. Well, in Oakland, we don't use that anymore. We use the relationship building model, which is officers are not on campus to police. Officers are on campus to keep the campus safe and make relationships with young people so that they feel confident in law enforcement. And so that's the program that we're running at the Oakland Police Department.
Thank you. Well, welcome again to all of our guests today. For our opening question, we will ask each of you to talk a little bit about a current issue or trend impacting the community and how that issue or trend relates specifically to your work that you just spoke about. So Sam will ask the first question.
So our first question is for Malia. We all know that there is currently a kindergarten readiness gap between children from low-income areas and their more affluent peers. And we're wondering if you can take about 5 minutes to talk a little bit about what impact kindergarten readiness has on a child's success, both inside and outside of the classroom. And if you can tell us more about First Five's findings about kindergarten readiness, specifically in Oakland.
Okay, and if you can give me a high sign when it's close to 5 minutes.
I can do
because
that for you.
I can keep going on and on about this for a while. And I feel a little bashful on this panel where we're taking on issues like police brutality and mass incarceration to be starting to talking with the experiences of our very youngest children. But I think it's really important to know that those connections are there, and that the disparities in access to resources and opportunity that show up on the captain's end and in the law enforcement system begin long before they ever show up in those systems, and that's really where this kindergarten readiness work comes in. 22% of the children in Alameda County are in poverty, and a child born in West Oakland has a life expectancy 15 years less than a child born in the Oakland Hills. And we see that long before they enter the kindergarten door. In 2013, every 2 years, First Five Alameda County does a kindergarten entry assessment where we try to take a snapshot of children entering kindergarten in Alameda County so we can sort of see how ready they are and what's going on with them in terms of their readiness for learning. And our most recent kindergarten entry assessment happened in 2013. We did kindergarten entry assessments on about 1,600 children in Alameda County, and about 360 of them were in Oakland schools, in Oakland Unified School District classrooms. 17 schools, 21 classrooms, trying to make sure that East and West Oakland were overrepresented there, so we could really see how our children who were starting out furthest from opportunity were doing. And what we learned was only 40%, only 4 out of 10 of those children, and this is in the first month of kindergarten, were walking in the door with the skills that they needed to walk in and be ready to learn. And so if you think about that for a minute, that's the first month of school. And so they're walking in maybe on the first day of school, and their teacher says to them, "Good morning, welcome, we're so glad to see you here. We want you to find your cubby, take off your coat, put your coat and your lunchbox in your cubby, and come sit on the red circle where our day is going to begin." And you've got a child maybe coming in who, how many of you are familiar with, have heard tossed around this idea of the word gap? And so for those of you, for a low-income child entering kindergarten, those of you who are familiar, how many fewer words have they heard in their lifetime than their more affluent peers? 30 million. 30 million words. In a day, a child in poverty hears half the number of words that their more affluent peers do. By the time they're, no, that's not right. The more affluent child will hear 3 times more words in a day than a child in poverty. By the time those children are 3 years old, the affluent child has twice as many words, twice the vocabulary of a more affluent child. And by the time they enter kindergarten, there's that 30 million word gap. And why should that be? Why should income have that kind of an impact on educational readiness before a child is even 5? Well, we know that the strongest predictor of a student's educational achievement is maternal education, very strongly tracked with income. That preschool makes a difference, so children who have resources are more likely to be able to attend preschool. The word gap, as I said, and very much in the schools you're working in and what you see in Oakland, the impact of trauma. That one of the critical skills really is about those children's ability to manage their emotions and their physiology and self-regulation. And that ability to self-regulate on a neurological level, on a cellular level, is deeply, deeply disrupted by exposure to trauma and fewer opportunities to sort of build those neural pathways. So all of those things lead to that situation where we have only 40% of kids entering Oakland's kindergarten, ready to begin learners. And James Heckman, who is a Nobel laureate economist who's done incredible work on the economic impact of early intervention, says skill begets skill. That we get more skilled when we begin with skills. We get more opportunities when we begin with opportunities. And so that first 5 minutes in the classroom where you're coming in with that 30 million word gap and you've never heard that many rows of instructions, put away your lunchbox, find your cubby, put your coat away, and you're feeling behind in that first 5 minutes, that feeling as though you can't be successful continues to beget those feelings. And what we can do about that is what all of you are doing in your Jumpstart classrooms. There are some things that predict school readiness that we're not going to do anything about. Age, gender, race all have an impact. But there are things like children being hungry and tired, parents knowing what readiness means, and children having the kinds of opportunities that you're giving them through Jumpstart do make a difference. We know that preschool readiness experiences for children who aren't enrolled in formal preschool, as short as 6 weeks in the summer before they enter, can make a difference for them. So there are things that we can and should be doing that we need to have the political will to do. And part of having the political will to do it is really understanding that those interventions are the smartest interventions we can make to keep children out of the juvenile justice system, so that we're doing what James Heckman refers to as pre-distribution, not redistribution, because it's a better investment to stop a problem before it starts, let that kid feel successful when they're coming in, so that success can beget success, rather than the expense of trying to fix a problem further down the line.
Thank you so much, Malia. Our next question is for Dominique. There are currently a lot of conversations happening across the country about racism. And we know that part of your work as a pastor focuses on racial reconciliation. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is and how you think it fits in with the nationwide conversation?
Yes, I also pick up real quick on a couple of things I heard Melina say that I think are important. One of the new fields of study is looking at how children, particularly in under-resourced urban environments, suffer from what previously was being termed as post-traumatic stress syndrome, but they've actually said that that's not an adequate descriptor of what's going on, because unlike soldiers who go off to war and then come back to environments, they never actually leave those environments. So it's not post, it's a present traumatic stress syndrome. And they've done research to say that the number of students who come from urban environments who actually are affected by this are close to like 30-35%. So this is a huge portion of our students in these urban environments who are actually trying to overcome this additional barrier, in addition to all of the other barriers that they're facing. And I think one of the most important voices to something I'll speak to a little bit later is the school-to-prison pipeline. Michelle Alexander says that we have kids who are constantly being shuffled from underfunded, under-resourced schools to brand new high-tech prisons. And so there is a conscious decision being made about where certain people's value lies most. And so I think as we think about this, part of how that folds into racial reconciliation is really looking at how we have been divided and broken as a nation, as a people, along racial lines. And it's looking at that truthfully, going to the hard places, acknowledging the mistakes that we've made, and looking at how we can step into those gaps and move forward to make a better present and future. And so, from a pastoral perspective, it really focuses on our brokenness and how sin has tainted how we see ourselves and see each other. And because of that, our reconciliation with God allows us to see people in the way that God intended us to see each other and our communities. And so a big part of my work is trying to help us as communities and a nation to be honest about the ways that race has fractured our world and how it continues to be this huge chasm that we have been unable to overcome. And so how that plays out in a number of different ways are looking at the fact that, African Americans in this nation represent 12% of the population, but about 50% of the prison and jail population. That's a racial outcome. When we look at the fact that Native Americans on average have a 20 to 25 year shorter life expectancy than anybody else because of the opportunities that are afforded to them mostly on the reservations, that's a racial outcome. And so it's looking at these things and it's being truthful about how they came to be and how they have been sustained and how if we don't intervene in very tangible ways, they will continue to persist going forward. And so this manifests itself within our school, within our curriculum. There is what some professors will call epistemological racism, where we look at actually the understanding of where knowledge comes from and how we've canonized certain fields of knowledge or certain perspectives, and we have excluded other perspectives about what knowledge is. And I think for me, this as a historian, so I also have a master's in U.S. history, and so for me as a historian, history is probably one of the grossest places that this happens. When we look at what is taught as U.S. history in this nation, and we understand that by and large the reality is U.S. history is the history of educated middle to upper middle class white males by and large, and it excludes the narratives and the experiences and the contributions of all women and people of color by and large, and it romanticizes certain elements of how we came to be the superpower that we are. And so for me, racism from a pedagogically perspective looks at something like the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, or the reality of lynching in this nation, where from our 50-year period from post-Civil War, there were approximately 5,500 African Americans who were lynched in this nation. But that's not recorded as part of U.S. history. That is very much U.S. history. But there have been people in school boards who get together and decide what goes in textbooks and what doesn't go in textbooks. And that plays a large role in re-perpetuating a lot of the racial differences that occur, because when significant instances happen nationwide, there are very different perspectives of like how this is either a continuation of a racial injustice or this is just an isolated event. And so our education system actually plays a huge role in how a lot of these racial tensions unfortunately have been able to re-perpetuate themselves and sustain themselves.
Thank you. Brandon, your bio states that your passion for social justice manifests itself with a deep commitment to OCO's Lifelines campaign. Can you share more about this campaign and why it's relevant to the community of Oakland?
Sure. As Captain Armstrong, I just want to, I'm excited. I'm excited for you. So first of all, I don't know if you saw when he was talking, I was grinning from ear to ear, because this is actually an example of what good community policing looks like. And I'm glad it's being rewarded in our police department, and kind of combating a history of crazy oppression. So can you clap it up one more time? Second is, so I'm actually from West Oakland as well. And I come to this work because I experienced this, or my family, we experienced a bifurcation of opportunity when I was young. My mother sent me to St. Dominic's Elementary in San Francisco because they had uniforms, and there were nuns who didn't play, so she liked that. But what happened with that is I went to Archbishop Reardon High School afterwards and got a scholarship, and then I went to American University and got a scholarship. But my cousins, my brothers, they all went through Oakland Unified School District, and most of them have had serious challenges. Every male in my life, black males, have done serious time in jail and or prison. My father did 12 years in prison. And my cousin, the one I was speaking about the difference in experience, actually has never spent a calendar year out of his life outside of Alameda County Jail, Santa Rita specifically. So that has pushed me, and it fuels me consistently every day, because I see these folks, right? And I have to say to myself, what's the difference? And the difference was opportunity. The Live Free campaign, as we're calling it now, how do we keep our folks living, right? Actually succeeding and living free. It's based on a couple of components. It's violence reduction, economic dignity, and it's mass incarceration. That's what the work is about. But it came out of the hard work of organizing, which is actually connecting with people, helping them find their self-interest and push their own boundaries. When we first started the work that brought us to this whole comprehensive Live Free conversation, we started talking just about ceasefire, and in a punitive way. At the time, ceasefire wasn't necessarily working with the right community members, like Pastor George Cummings and Pastor Ben McBride. They weren't necessarily at the table. And we were doing a lot more of calling folks in and doing just more of a punitive lens. Stop this or we'll arrest you. Well, we sat down with some calling participants and asked them, like, what do you really need to stop violence? And they told us a couple of things. First, they said jobs and opportunity and relationships with the community would help. But then we also looked in their backgrounds, and we found out that most of them had done some serious time as juveniles and adults, right? They had already been inside the system of mass incarceration. So we kind of switched our lens a little bit and started working on economic dignity. Things like CBAs, and like the Oakland Army base, opportunities that come for community members around that. We're working on Coliseum City now. Have you all heard about that?
Yeah.
How they're trying to expand and keep the teams, and there's an opportunity to really stop displacement as well and get our folks jobs through that effort. And we transferred a lot of that power that we've been gaining around that to working on mass incarceration and our experience of it in Alameda County, which is our work in Santa Rita Jail and also Glen Dyer. And the fact that right now, with Proposition 47, folks know about that, right? Of quite a few charges, drug charges from felonies to misdemeanors, and also AB 109, realignment. You know about that, right? That's where we're transferring nonviolent, non-serious, non-sexual offenders from state control to local control, where we can support them even more, right? These are examples of a real opportunity to end mass incarceration if we do it the right way. But what's happening at our local level? Law enforcement continues to take up the bulk of it. And I'm talking about county law enforcement, namely the sheriff, district attorney, and other folks. So right now we're in a campaign right now about investing in people, not prisons, where we're trying to make sure that this year, 50% of the dollars for realignment, which is $34 million, go to community-based organizations for services.
Wow, thank you. Okay, and finally, Captain, you've talked about the importance of improving community police relations, and you spoke a little bit about that in your introduction as well. What do you think are some of the initial steps? We'll start small. This is a big issue, of course. So some of the initial steps that need to be taken to address this, and how is OPD working on that?
So I always think that the most important thing you can do is acknowledge your past. And so law enforcement has to acknowledge the mistakes that they've made in the past, the tragic incidents that have occurred in the city of Oakland that's been happening for 40, 50 years. And so we're beginning to do that. We're beginning to, for the first time, accept responsibility for causing some of the issues that we've caused in the community. And that's a difficult conversation for law enforcement because traditionally law enforcement is very kind of to themselves, right? We kind of stick to ourselves and kind of, everybody would say we stood by a code at some point, a code that I never understood, but I spent my career working in the community, and so I never really understood the code. So to have the opportunity to have honest conversations with communities that have concerns, real life concerns that really deal with the issues around violence every single day is important. And so really moving towards having productive conversations where police officers are now truly doing community policing by coming into schools, coming into communities, and meeting with community members and talking about the issues that plague their particular community and coming up with solutions, right? Solutions that are created in partnership, solutions where community members have a voice on how we police their communities, that they can say to us that what's important to them and what's meaningful to them is a step in the right direction. Putting new policies and procedures in place for a more transparent process. You know, one of the things we've done at the Oakland Police Department was we was the first police department in America to equip each one of our police officers with body-worn cameras. And so we did that 4 years ago, and now that conversation is coming forth now for every police officer in America to wear a body-worn camera. And so we've been in front of the curve on some things. And so as you've seen in the past 6 or 7 months, how important cameras and the opportunity to see video of police actions has played an important role in changing the culture of law enforcement. It's been really impactful, especially when you look at something like that happened last week in South Carolina. And you think about, had there not been video evidence, that probably would have never come out. Local recruitment of police officers. I mean, we have to put greater emphasis on recruiting people who have some connection to our community. That you don't have to always live in Oakland, but you have to understand the climate in Oakland. You have to be able to connect with the community in Oakland and understand some of the difficult challenges that our cities face, and some of the difficult challenges that young people face particularly. And so that's important. Our recruiting efforts now have been focused on trying to become a more diverse police department. There was a study done, and we're still one of the most diverse police departments in the country, but we did not reflect the demographics of the city. For us to be a city of nearly 28% African American, but only have somewhere in the range of 18% of African American police officers showed that there was some room to grow, as well as our Latino officers and our Asian officers as well. We needed to grow in those areas, and so we have policies and procedures now in place to do recruiting locally. And then lastly, I would say the ability to just humanize one another. The fact of the matter is that the mainstream media, as well as even people that advocate against law enforcement, have to, we have to acknowledge that these are human beings. Not everybody in uniform is a bad person, and that just like every person on the streets that even commit crimes are not bad people. Sometimes people have very difficult circumstances. I know that firsthand, like Brandon talked about. When you grow up with families that have people that commit crimes in your family, you understand that they're not bad people. Sometimes they have difficult circumstances that cause them to make sometimes bad decisions. And so those are things that we can work on. And so I think there's room to humanize one another. Law enforcement has a job to do to protect your community, and then community members have to be open to hear what is happening, and then have some input. If you don't like what we do, we can have a productive conversation and come up with solutions. And that's really what the Oakland Police Department is becoming, more solution based. And so I hope that moving up the chain, I can continue to open up that conversation for people, especially like yourselves in the positions that you're in, having a line of communication with us so we can understand what's impacting young people you deal with, because that's vital to us. That when you've been a police officer for 20 years, I remember young people that I made contact with that were 10 or 12 years old, and now some of them were victims of homicide or suspects of homicides. And you always wonder, is there something that you could have did? Is there a resource that you could have provided that might have helped intervene to prevent them from being in that situation? And so we know that the things that you guys do will have a direct impact on young people across our city.
Thank you. Okay, so our first question is thinking about education as an institution. What are some of the challenges the community of Oakland faces in ensuring all children have access to quality education? So I know, Malia, of course, your work is so involved in education, but Brandon, I know OCO also has the Excellent Education campaign, so I'm not sure if you can speak to any of that. But again, really, this is open to anyone. So what are some of the challenges the community of Oakland faces in ensuring all children have access to quality education?
I think it is just important to acknowledge the reality that someone, I think perhaps Brandon said, of understanding just how underfunded our schools are. And speaking from the place of early education, the state's reimbursement rate for a day, for a full day preschool, for a child in a subsidized slot is about $36 a day. We're in a situation in Oakland where Oakland recently passed a minimum wage bill. And because the minimum wage bill didn't change what the state reimbursement rates were, right? That was a local jurisdiction.
Right.
State reimbursement rate. That state reimbursement rate is so insufficient that we're looking at preschools who open their doors primarily to children who receive state subsidy being faced with closing down because they can't pay minimum wage to all of their staff and make ends meet on what that state reimbursement rate is. And when I send my dog to board at a kennel, it costs me more per day than the state reimbursement rate to care for a 4-year-old child in care all day at preschool. So I know that it's not all about money, but I just wanted to start by putting the reality on the table that there's a big piece of it that's about what resources our educators are being given to work with.
Anyone have anything to add?
So along with the mass incarceration or the Live Free work, also organized in 2 schools in West Oakland, Hoover Elementary and also Lafayette. And our children face real challenges just getting high quality education, to be honest. And the big difference is a resource question. Right, our children in our flatland schools historically have been large. All our teachers are great people, but they've received the teachers who aren't as equipped most of the time in our flatland schools, and particularly in West Oakland. And You know, we've done things historically like brought in initiatives and not sustained them, not supported them, and actually made our children's experience in school worse. So what we've done lately and what we're continuing to do is exposing parents to opportunities, or exposing them to opportunities to see what good quality education looks like, and having them come back to their campus on a site-specific basis and say, this is what we want and this is what we need for our kids to be successful. And we've seen through the small schools movement, it had its strengths and its challenges. You all should look that up, especially if you're interested in education work long term. It had a tremendous effect, helping Oakland be the most improved large school district in California for 7 years in a row. So check that out. But for us, it's really about organizing and having the people on the ground, people most impacted, advocate for their children.
I'll chime in with a couple things. I think some of them are truer nationwide or as true nationwide. As long as schools, incomes, and stuff is connected to property taxes, there's going to be this kind of inequity within schools. That's a reality. It's a broken system. We know it's broken, and we're not doing anything about it. Another broken part of our system is the response that we've chosen to take as a nation to children who are disruptive. This punitive response to expelling kids and calling in law enforcement to arrest kids on school premises has led to higher dropout rates, has led to higher incarceration rates, have led to everything that is not about what we're supposed to be trying to do, which is educate our kids. And so when we take into those realities and look at some of the stats in our nation, a high schooler drops out every 26 seconds. There's more than 6,000 students every day, 1.2 million a year. Like when you sit with those stats and you really think about the reality that like a high school dropout now is 8 times more likely to go to prison than a high school graduate. They're not eligible for 90% of new jobs, and that they get paid 40 cents to the dollar that a college graduate makes. Like, we're really limiting people's life chances by this punitive response to kids who are acting out. And this isn't something that really just starts like later in life. We see that this response starts at 4 years old. The U.S. Department of Education and the Civil Rights Department said that black students are 3 times more likely than their white peers to experience this kind of retribution in schools. And we know that black kids in particular represent 16% of the student population, but up to 32% of those who are suspended and expelled from school. And when we see these stats and we see these trajectories, it's no wonder at the end when we talk about mass incarceration that the stats end up looking like they do. So you pointed to that earlier. There's a very tangible connection between the responses that we've chosen as young as preschool to what ultimately unfolds in our national dialogue around things like mass incarceration.
And then lastly, can I comment and say that in the city of Oakland, we recognize some of what you just talked about. And so what we did at the Oakland Police Department was we came to an agreement with the Oakland Unified School District that our officers would practice restorative justice in the city of Oakland. And so Oakland police officers do not arrest students in schools. Arrest is the final means absent any other alternative. And so what we've done is train our police officers to utilize alternative services within the city. First starting with restorative justice, and then using community-based organizations like Center Fours or Youth Court, trying to find every way we can to not introduce young people to the criminal justice system, because we've seen the data of what happens once they're introduced to the system. And so we have seen a dramatic decline at the Oakland Police Department in juvenile arrest. And so I think this mindset, for us, which is sort of a sea change in how we do business, will be impactful, I think, long term in terms of how many young people that we find ourselves introduced into the criminal justice system.
And I just can't resist saying to Dominique's point that nationally, the age group most likely to be expelled are preschoolers. that the expulsion rates for 4-year-olds are higher than for high schoolers, and that the child most likely to be expelled from preschool for behavioral issues is a black boy, which isn't a surprise to anybody, and that the strongest predictor of expulsion isn't the child's behavior, but the level of support that's available to that teacher. And so that is a call to action, because that's something we can do about. And the other call to action is that comes from national data, and I can't tell you what the expulsion rate in Oakland is for preschoolers, because we don't know, because we don't collect it.
And one more thing, just to chime in. Another disturbing trend that's happening nationwide is the number of students who are homeless. And I mean, this is skyrocketing. It's a national problem. And so when we look at things like reduced lunch programs, which are great in schools, but what happens to those kids during the summertime? A lot of those kids go hungry. A lot of those kids don't have access to that food. And so these are consistent problems that continue to re-perpetuate themselves. And then the last thing, I appreciate the work that the OPD is doing in regards to trying to get officers who represent the communities that they will be policing. That's another problem with schools. We need more teachers who understand the communities that they're going to be teaching within. You need to know the culture of the community. You need to be able to understand certain rhythms and realities. I have a short story. I had a professor who was a psychotherapist who told us a story about being assigned to a student who had gotten expelled from a school because the student, this was a couple years ago, about 10 to 15 years ago, the student was doing a dance when she heard music come on in the school, and one of the administrators saw her and said, any student who would be doing that kind of dance is obviously being sexually violated at home, and being exposed to things that they shouldn't be exposed to at that young of an age. The child was doing the Tootsie Roll. And so it's a dance that we all know, but people from outside the community wouldn't understand that fully. And so it gets reported, this child ends up getting expelled from school, and they go down this pipeline we were just talking about. So it becomes a very real, important issue that we have to grapple with.
Thank you. So we've already talked a little bit about mass incarceration and school to prison pipeline. And I'm just wondering if anybody has anything that they'd like to add about how these issues impact the community of Oakland.
I mean, statistics aside, where do our brothers congregate, right? What do our colleges look like? Where are black men, right? The impact of mass incarceration is they're no longer in community, right? They're not with their families. They're not being fathers or brothers or uncles, cousins, right? They're growing up, man. There was whole communities without fathers, young brothers raising themselves and just figuring things out. So again, without just on a visual, how often do you see 3 or 4 or 5 educated, black males hanging out?
So I'll say from a law enforcement perspective, I think we know based on the data that in the city of Oakland, we've averaged over 107 homicides a year for the last 20 years. Our arrest numbers for the last 5 years have seen a dramatic decrease, but our homicides have went down. And so we acknowledge the fact that arrest alone will not fix this problem, and it hasn't fixed this problem for many years. And I think that's something that all law enforcement is beginning to understand, that we can't arrest our way out of this issue surrounding violence. And so we're beginning to have stronger dialogue with Brandon and groups like that, advocacy groups, to come up with better solutions that help keep people in their communities, offer them solutions, try to identify those that might potentially be at risk of committing crimes, and offering them services prior to them being engaged in that type of activity. And hopefully that'll be able to help them make better decisions so that they don't come in contact with law enforcement in that capacity. And so acknowledging that now, we know that arrest is not our answer.
Yeah, I understanding this from a more, like Brandon was saying, a communal standpoint, national stats say that 7.3 million children have at least one incarcerated parent. 70% of those kids will find themselves in the criminal justice system at some point in their lifetimes. So like when we see that there's that strong a correlation between parents being incarcerated and their kids going into incarceration, that has to be an intervention point. That has to be something that we prioritize and say, there has to be another way. There has to be some way that we as a community can do wraparound services for kids who have incarcerated parents to try to steer them clear of the criminal justice system. And so, like Brandon's saying, we can go into more stats. The stats are all there. They're depressing. They're hard. And the stats increasingly aren't just about Black people. The Hispanic population is rapidly catching up with the African American population in a lot of these statistics. In the community I work in, there is a lot of problems with undocumented populations and refugee families, and particularly where I find myself situated ministering on 23rd and International, the problem of prostitution and human trafficking is insane. We have kids who go right across the street to school on an everyday basis. They see women exploiting themselves on an everyday basis. It becomes normative to these elementary schools to see women out there in the streets in this way, shape, and form. And so it does something to the psyche of a young, impressionable kid. And so we have to look at these realities and be honest about how it's affecting our youth and the trajectories that they take going forward with their lives.
You know, Brandon talked about the young men that are raising themselves, and we work with the Alameda County Public Health Department to do something called Daddy Boot Camps, which are, skills for men expecting their first child. And routinely in our Daddy Boot Camps in East Oakland and West Oakland, and the first question is, what was your relationship in your life with your fathers? And routinely we'll have 16, 18, 20 young men expecting a baby, none of whom had a relationship with their own father. And it makes a huge difference. And so, to that point, where are those men? Why weren't they? Where were those fathers? And how is that impacting the way they're available to be present in the lives of their children? Because, with the child development hat on, huge piece of the hidden victims of mass incarceration are how many of those guys are dads?
And just the last piece, they always say the experience of the Black community is nothing more than a bellwether for what happens with everybody else, right? So 1 in 100 folks, regardless of race, ethnicity, religion, whatever you want to look at, they're under control of the criminal justice system, being supervised, in jail, or something like that, right? So you see increasingly white males as well being incarcerated. When you put quotas on how many people need to be in a private prison once it's built, they're going to fill that prison, right? And at a certain point, it doesn't matter what you look like. If I can get you in there, I will, right?
Which just speaks to the last thing. The problem of mass incarceration exists because it's a lucrative industry,
Right.
Particularly when we look at private prisons and the financial exploitation that is happening. People are being seen as capital. And until we really look at the system in that way, I don't think we'll be moved to do what needs to be done to dismantle it.
Thank you all. We're gonna move our last question to the closing so that we can give all of our students a chance to ask some questions. So at this time, we'd like to open it up to you all to ask your own questions to the panel. Sam has a mic, so if you have a question, you can just raise your hand and we'll come over to you.
Thank you, Sam. Hello, thank you so much for being here. So obviously we discussed some very, very serious embedded issues within the communities that are like Oakland, and we obviously work there, so it's really important to us. But how do we prepare these kids? They're 3 and 4 years old. They're going to go into these, they're going to face these issues at some point in their life. How can we help prepare them with our line of work? Yeah, I see that face.
I think part of it, you're doing it. You're doing it. That and I salute all of you for doing it. That kindergarten entry predicts 3rd grade reading, predicts high school graduation, predicts involvement. Brandon said it. And so part of it is that you're doing it now. And the other thing that I would add to that is the most important predictor of resilience, or the most important protective factor in the life of a child, is a strong positive relationship with a forever adult. And a forever adult is we may be there for an academic year or for as long as our program's funding is there to support that family. But each of those children somewhere has a forever adult. And so that when you're working with those children in your preschool settings, look around and ask yourself how that school setting is reaching out to the forever adults in that child's life. Because the people who are going to turn the curve for that child are their forever adults. And if we're not supporting those adults, we're not doing what we need to be doing for that child. And it's hard, because you know what? The adults aren't as cute. But that's where we're going to turn the curve.
And I'll say, especially in Oakland, like, don't be afraid to introduce young people to positive law enforcement officers, right? That the fact of the matter is that if you live in the city of Oakland and you live in one of those challenged neighborhoods, you are going to have an interaction with us, even if you 4 years old, right? So whether you see us in your neighborhood answering a call, or whether you experience a traumatic incident in your neighborhood, or whether we're called to your home, that you as a young person, these kids should feel comfortable with law enforcement, understand what our responsibility is when we're there, right? To keep them safe and feel comfortable with communicating with us. Now, that's why I say, it's important that we come in classrooms and positive settings where they can interact with us in a way in which they can begin to gain some level of trust with law enforcement, and hopefully that can be developed more strongly over time.
Yeah, the work that you all are doing is imperative work. The research, cognitive research has been done and said that what's happening for a youth, by the time that they're 8, the racial imagination has already been formed. And whatever they're gonna think and respond to racially has been embedded in them by the time that they're 8 years old. So y'all are doing fundamentally important work now, but you have to be conscious of, like, the examples that you use, videos you play, curriculum, different things, and looking at how it's reinforcing or challenging racial norms or gender norms and class norms, and how is it calling them to think about things outside of the box in a way that is going to bring a more holistic community that we desire. And so it's very small things, from like looking at, the wording in, textbooks that children's books that you're reading, like the representation and the videos that is being watched. All those things are forming these children in very profound ways.
I say be consistent. So I don't know what your commitment looks like, whether it's kind of looks like sometimes it can be 15 hours, it can be, I don't know, but whatever that commitment is, sticking to it. A few years, I did a DC Read, which was part of the AmeriCorps program, and I would see the impact of me showing up with students, young black boys in particular, and how it would brighten their day. And I would see the impact of other brothers who would do it, and I would see when they didn't show up, how it impacted students, right? And without that kind of, or somebody would just quit instead of just going and saying goodbye and having that conversation with the kid. Those things really impact children, so be consistent.
Hello.
You're all amazing. Okay, so I have a lot of questions. My first question, seriously, someone. No, well, I'll let other people go. But this is just one of many, so be prepared for my question. So Dominique, you mentioned a lot of theories that I've read, and so it triggered something on this theory of cultural opposition, right? And how particularly people of color, particularly men of color, want to oppose white culture and the dominant culture. So we do a lot of things that actually hurt our community, and like a lot of my cousins, for example, would they're taught that like they need to be gangsters, or like for them to earn respect within the community, they need to do things like be gangbangers or like sell drugs or do drugs and like demean women. So how I guess this goes to all of you. How can we teach these kids to not do that? Like, how do you, I guess, get like the inside thing, like telling them that that's not what they need to do? It's like, I don't know how to explain it. Do you understand my question? I see you guys nodding. Right? It's like they idolize this thug mentality. So how do we get these students to reject this idea that they think that part of them being like black or Hispanic in my case, that like part of them being that is also being a thug? And how do we get them to, or how do we help them separate those ideas at a young age? Because I already see that these kids are like trying to be tough and fight each other in ways that like I see my older cousins doing. And like you said, they've all been in the incarceration system. So I know that's a hard one, but like at a young age, they're already being molded.
I think you start by being very intentional about the examples that you show while you're present with them. And for a lot of these kids, the reason why they aspire to be those things is that might be all they know and all they have access to. And so if you're intentional about showing them other examples, examples that challenge whatever limitations that they might have or see or even feel, then I think it allows them to imagine new possibilities for their lives and for their whole communities. And I think, so like what you were saying about introducing them to positive law enforcement, that's one very tangible way. But also I think it's important for you all to see the representation of the students that you have and find younger people who embody something alternative to that. And so like what Brandon was saying, like for young people, when they see younger African Americans come back and give back to them, then they're just like, this is different. Like I can understand like a 40 or a 50-year-old person, but if you can get somebody in their 20s, somebody in their 18s, somebody who they like, oh, you could be like a big brother to me, then they can see themselves in that person in a different way. And I think that starts to begin to challenge some of those things. And then the other like last thing I'll say is I had my first real racial incident when I was 5 years old. And so it happens really early, and being supportive and being able to walk alongside people and help them navigate and make some sense out of why stuff like that is happening to them before they can even cognitively fully understand what's going on. I think to help them understand that you're not alone, you're not the only person who feels like this is not the only person who's ever happened to. I think it makes them reconstruct some categories that if you try to do it in isolation, it does generally lead into more destructive behavior.
And I agree with Brandon. With Dominique, I really think you should challenge the norm, right? That I know where I grew up and like where Brandon grew up, all I had around me in the area I grew up, the project was Camel Village, and if you know what that is, at 8th and Campbell and 8th and Willow, all you seen was drug dealers and gangsters every day, all day. I remember walking one block from to Prescott School and never seeing anybody that was doing anything positive in my community. And so I think you challenge the norm of what they see every day, right? That you also take the time to understand what's going on in their communities, right? That you can, there are resources out there in a city that could be helpful and beneficial to them as well as you and how they interact with you. And so I say to take advantage of that, take advantage of Oakland, which is unique to most cities in America, right? To have the level of funding that we have to support the community-based organizations in our city is an asset to you. And so there's so many groups out there that's doing the work that could be impactful that these young people haven't been exposed to. And so even as police officers, we're starting to see that just making recommendations of resources to young people is important, right? I mean, we deal with young kids as early as elementary school, sometimes with anger management problems, right? And in the past, our response was always to take them to some type of protective services, home or something like that. And now, because of the resources that's available, we're starting to be in partnership with community-based organizations that could be helpful, that have the capacity to be able to help these young people deal with some of these issues. Issues that probably wouldn't get addressed at home. And so, because even at home, they lack the knowledge of understanding what's available to them in their own community. So, you know, you can be really, really an asset to that kid when you see issues arise in that classroom to help find resources to address those things. And so don't, you know, I would always say don't turn a blind eye to that, because that could be the precursor to something far worse later on.
So I think that there's a place for supporting individuals, and then there's like systemic stuff, because you can support a young man as much as you want to, and when he goes home, if he sees that every day, you know, the outcomes are going to be what they're going to be. So there's this like slippery slope about trying to tokenize and make sure that young brother is a good young brother, right? Versus the systemic reform was making sure our institutions are open and accept all of our young brothers and sisters. Because the conditions of like unemployment, the conditions of like police brutality, the conditions of mass incarceration show up in that kid's life every day. And unless we're looking at it in the form of like, in the glance of systemic reform, I think it'll be piecemeal, and you'll tokenize these young folks. Yeah, I mean, I just know I see the experience of 1 in 10 that make it out, or 2 in 20, or you know, like, and I don't know if that's enough anymore, right? I don't know if we need to stretch ourselves and really think about what pushing the system itself does for our young folks, and not just that young folk, their network, right? The protective factor, as she talked about, is going to be the people in their lives who are positive role models for them.
And can I say this? I'll tell you. So I'll tell you from my own experience that the only teacher that I really remember was my first grade teacher. Right? I'm 40 some odd years old, and that's really because she really cared about me, right? And that was from when you come up in the community that I came up in. You're not used to people overtly caring about you and saying to you like, hey, I want you to succeed, I want you to do well, I want you to do better, I see the potential in you. And so that was meaningful to me as I traveled through all of those tough experiences that I had to go through in the streets of West Oakland. That really made a difference to me early on. Somebody had confidence in me and told me how smart I was at a young age. And now I know friends that didn't get that same kind of reinforcement from teachers. And so, and I'm not saying that was the ultimate difference, but I can tell you that it did make a difference for this one kid, right? And it could make a difference for another child.
And I think it also helps us, this question is a great question, it should help us to realize how the media has been colonized. Like, we are fed a certain image of a caricature of who black and brown people are, particularly black and brown young men. Right. And if we don't challenge that notion from a very young age, it becomes cemented and sustained or re-perpetuated. And so I also want to say, like, when you are showing alternative examples, show them in fields other than sports and music. Like, intentionally show them in the sciences, in the math. Now that's gonna, for a lot of people, that's gonna require you do your own research to find out who those people are. But you have to show people, like, you come from a history of excellence. You actually are not an isolated person in trying to achieve this, but there have been plenty of people from communities just like this who have been able to surpass all the stats and everything that's stacked against them to be able to become these things. And so, yeah, it is a systemic thing. But you all individually can play a role, and this isn't just something that black and brown kids need to know and be taught. White schools, Asian American schools, all schools need to have this notion of what the character of black and brown people are challenged from a very young age.
So systemic reform, though, I just want to be clear that we can do we can focus on individuals and change the system. So there are models of educating where you focus on building relationship with young people intentionally in a school environment where it's smaller, right? Where you can actually build that tight relationship with that youth and follow them through school, through internships and things like that. But I think the issue is, like, even where you're doing it now, if you go into teaching, if you go into working with students, thinking about how you can do what you do and then also influence a bigger system, the bigger system around you.
Thank you. Who else has a question?
I can probably do it without the mic.
All right, go for it.
My question is kind of specifically for Captain Armstrong. You were talking a little bit about restorative justice, and a lot of the education classes at Cal focus on that. But I think that your case was very specific because the ones we learned about were like teachers doing restorative justice, and so they often talked about then having a more negative reaction when the kids entered into society or had interactions outside of school, where the police would respond obviously not with restorative justice, and seeing then rebellion when they encountered that and realized restorative justice wasn't like normal day-to-day life. So with the Oakland Police Department doing it, I was wondering what differences or how you guys were like dealing with that.
So we're dealing with it from the standpoint, first, we work with the school district so that we participate in their restorative justice session, what they call counseling sessions. And so we're just there to begin to expose young people to the potential dangers of their behavior, right? Not that we're there to arrest you, but we want you to know that this is what really could happen, right? But also, it's for the officers as well, right? The officers can sometimes hear what led up to this young woman or man's decision, the student's decision to maybe violate the law in some way or take whatever action they took, right? And so law enforcement as well has some growth to do in terms of even seeing young people as young people and not as potential criminals, right? That young people make mistakes, and we as a community should want to see the young people just correct and be held accountable for the mistake, but that doesn't necessarily have to be by means of incarceration, right? And so this whole idea is a new concept for law enforcement. Quite honestly, most people watch TV and believe that when they get into police work that they're gonna chase people down and arrest people and it's gonna be fun and wild, right? And so, but the reality is that in real police work, everybody that you come in contact with, these are these people's lives, right? And these have long-term effects on their lives. And so trying to get officers to really understand the impact of the decisions that they make and how that's going to impact the individual for a long period to come, right? Because the officer is going to do his amount of hours and go home, right? But the experience is going to be with that other person for a lifetime. And so really recognizing that in that restorative justice practice, that so officers can make better decisions around who they even arrest, right? Like, is it really necessary to arrest this kid, or can we find alternatives? This is I can tell you this is really changing the dynamic of policing, and some people aren't happy about that. But I think in the long term, it's better, especially in minority communities where this is a pattern or a cycle that they've seen over and over again with family members, fathers, relatives, things like that, going into the prison system and then that becoming a lifestyle. So hopefully the restorative justice helps us at least do that.
So then it's being used like outside of schools as well?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Outside of school, we give it as a resource to all police officers, right? They have the discretion, but we really do push them to utilize that program. And why? And because in most cases, the Alameda County, the JJC is actually on board as well, which is that the JJC has really high standards for us to even bring someone into juvenile hall. And so with that being said, officers have two choices: either to not take action at all, or to find some restorative justice or alternative program for them. I think people would always assume that not taking any action at all might be best, but that's not always true, right? The fact of the matter is that if you don't take any action, that could be even worse because they could get progressively worse with what they do. So just doing things in a program like this that allows the kid to maintain their dignity and still be able to grow even though they make mistakes, which is the normal part of adolescence, right? Is making mistakes, right?
Other questions? We can come back to Julia. No, Jocelyn.
She needs that mic.
Yeah.
I can't
really formulate my question correctly, but I guess like what I want to like know about your opinions on how can like schools teach children that like they're like, because a lot of schools are like diverse and stuff. So how can schools teach a diverse group of kids that they're all enough the way they are when like the American education system is very about standardized, so it doesn't even have to like mean like about like different cultures and races, but also like different abilities. And so I mean, just how can we, like, we're all teachers, and like how can the schools and teachers make sure that they teach the children like the American education system, but also like let them know that just because they're diverse or different, like doesn't mean that it's a bad thing. Just because I just remember growing up and like being in like the English language learners program or something, I've kind of grew up like thinking that like knowing Spanish was bad and like only English was good and that's the only way out, and like so I got this very negative idea of my own culture, and like sometimes I'm not like too proud of it and stuff like that. So like how can we teach kids now like that their cultures or their races or their different abilities are still okay and can be in conjunction with like the American education system, even though like it's a very standardized, like all tests, everyone has to score the same, and like it shouldn't be that way because kids are all different.
It's a tough question.
That is such a tough
It's a
question.
big one,
It's probably
yeah.
for one of these educators. But what I tell you, what's really funny is that, you know, we're learning about this even in law enforcement, right? Right now at the police department, we have a contract with Dr. Jennifer Eberhardt from Stanford University, who is the world-renowned expert on implicit bias, right? And she, you know, has provided us materials and training that even demonstrated to us how, you know, an African American kid was offered a white doll and a black doll, and he consistently chose the white doll, right? And so you starting from a young age of how they view themselves, right? And that for me was even surprising. So maybe one of these educators can also enlighten me too on.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't have the answer, but in listening to you, one of the things that it made me reflect on is, how do we get to a place where our goal isn't just to make the case that whatever you bring is okay, but that we all can't get there without what everyone brings. It's not about everyone being accepted, it's about really getting to the place where we realize that what everybody brings is necessary, and to be celebrated, not tolerated. And I think you're asking a big question about how we do that, but I think one of the places we really do have a long way to go is about valuing home culture, valuing home language, helping educators and parents and the community at large understand that children who have a strong foundation in their home languages and their home cultures are going to be more successful students. And it doesn't matter as much whether that home language and home culture is English or another language, and sort of that heartbreaking phenomenon of seeing parents who are not English speakers restraining themselves from talking to their children or encouraging home language with their children, because with the very best of intentions and wanting their children to do well in school, they think they're doing damage that way because what their child needs is English, when what we need to be helping everybody to understand is that a good language foundation is a good language foundation, whatever language it's in. So that's just sort of the language piece, and making sure that teachers are understanding good dual language learner pedagogy. But really what it makes me feel is, how do we get to the place, and I guess sharing your question, where it's not just we accept everybody's differences, but we really, truly celebrate them because we're all better because of them.
Okay, we have time for one more question. We're going to wrap up.
Can I come back here? Yeah.
So my question is also specifically for you, Captain Armstrong. connections that you said OPD is building with the communities. And I might be wrong, but it's the impression I've gotten is that OPD is kind of facilitating these new relationships. And what advice do you have if there are community members who want to kind of take on that role, and not specifically in the Oakland area, but like I'm going to be working in LA County at schools. So what kind of tips do you have for community members reaching out to their local police and saying like, we want to build these new types of relationships?
So I can tell you that, and Brandon will tell you that our primary strategy for crime reduction is our ceasefire strategy, and that's actually led by community, right? And so the dollars that we receive, the support that we got around the program came from OCO and working with organizers, community organizers. And so I think that you have to obviously find a group there that you can partner with, that has relationships with law enforcement, and then go in and meet with law enforcement. I think law enforcement across the country is becoming less insular than it was before, right? And that we are all opening up to have these kind of conversations because we know that everybody's looking at us right now and the way we're doing our business. And so I think you won't have any problem in most cases getting law enforcement to meet with you, and especially if you're with a group that's organized and have some credibility in the community, because that was important, is that the history of OCO and the work that they've done had a tremendous impact, right? Their ability for us to not, so they have such large numbers, right, across our city that was helpful because, sometimes community members don't like when we commit to one particular organization, right, because they expect us to maintain this approach citywide. And so the advantage of working with OCO was that they had relationships all across the city, which was helpful. So if I was to make a suggestion, I would say an organization that definitely has relationships across the city.
And in LA, that's LA Voice. They're doing schools work as well.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Okay, so for our closing, we're going to ask that each of you take about 2 minutes to talk a little bit about your vision for your community. And if you'd like, you can include a little bit about how some of these institutions or groups can work together. You guys can decide who goes first.
Okay. Yeah, the vision for my community is pretty strongly dictated by the realities of our community. Most of the people in our community are stereotyped and caricatured, and there is very little to no expectations for most people who are coming from my community, particularly the undocumented and refugee populations, those who are caught up in prostitution, human trafficking. There's not that many African Americans in my community, but the few that are there, very little expectations. So I think for me, it would be to have institutions who are present within our community be institutions that really want to be there because they value the people in the community, not institutions that are there abstracting resources or who are just there because they have to, but to really have teachers who want to work with this population of students, law enforcement who understands the realities of coming from communities such as this, who spend time with community members to hear what it is that the community says that it needs, not coming in and superimposing their own expectations and solutions upon our community. And people who understand that something as simple as the women who are out there on the streets being prostitutes, they're not the real problem. There's bigger systems, structures, problems that are forcing them to be out there selling their bodies for survival. So for me, that's a big part of my hope for my community, and it's churches working with schools, working with police officers, working with nonprofits, working all together to say, like, how can we collaboratively move this along as opposed to trying to work in our silos and seeing each other as either the enemy or as somebody who's not really as deeply invested in the community as our group is.
I want to live in a community where we have the compassion and the smarts and the discipline to be equitable and focus more on prevention than fixing problems later. So, and that really is about having the compassion and the smarts and the discipline to invest early, and the compassion to say that equity isn't everybody getting the same thing. Equity is people who are furthest from opportunity getting what they need, and understanding that that's not only the right thing to do, but it's a wise thing to do for our whole culture, that we're not ever going to get to where we need to be until we can start shifting the way we invest in families and do it sooner, because we're never going to get there from the place we are starting now with all the things we've been talking about today.
I'm gonna pull a conservative on Fox News. You asked a certain question, but I actually want to ask you a question. How many of you want to be teachers? Great. So I think first of all, I want to see my community live free. I want to see our communities. I'm unapologetically, and I think it's okay for me to be so now in this day and age when black men are being murdered and it's actually on camera. I'm unapologetically about the success for the future of young black males. And how do you fit into that? I think that's the question. And I hope that you'll see yourselves as liberators, right? In the kind of way that's working with people and not for them. And by that I mean, when you're in your classroom and you're helping that one student, those two students, those three students succeed, and then you see it the next year that it's 2 students and 3 students and 4 students, and you're noticing other teachers are having the same impact but only on a few students, that you come together and that you start talking about larger systemic reform, taking the successes that are around you and building and being leaders of the future that are actually creating something that can change in the big picture, change thousands of lives and not 10s and 20s and 30s, right? Get what I'm saying? I mean, I want you all to organize, right? Organizing is about building relationships around you and taking successes, right? And just making sure that they expand. This fly is like, but seriously, that is what I see the role of educators for the future, for you all, and you all are inspiring me by being here today.
Wow, I said, and first of all, I thank you guys for all being here, because I know, especially in my capacity, how important it is, the important role that educators play in young people's lives, and how it affects them long term. And so I think what I would say first of all is that I want to live and work in a community that is safe. And safety does not just mean free of violence, right? I mean, there's child predators. There's so much in society that contributes to young people feeling unsafe. And so I think we all have a unique role in this room, because we all love service. It's not just police, right? That safety rests in the hands of teachers and community servants as well, right? That everybody should speak up and put their hands around young people to try to help them have the best life possible for themselves. And so we at the police department, I know that we can do better. I know we can do better, and I know that we can focus on our mission, which is to keep communities safe and not contribute to communities being unsafe, right? And so that's the question, right? My overall dream is for police officers to make communities safe and not unsafe, right? That you do your job, but you don't impact the community. a way in which they fear you. Because we shouldn't be feared, we should be appreciated for making the sacrifice to make people's community safer. And if you fear us, then there's some issues that we need to talk about as a society on how we do better.
Thank you all so much. It is so clear that you all are so dedicated to our community, so we really appreciate you all taking some time to come out and speak with us today. So please join me in thanking them. So at this time, I'm actually going to hand things over to Alex, and I have a few paperwork things to give to you all.
Okay, so we are going to transition into our closing. So today, as we said at the very beginning, our theme was connection, right? Connecting you to each other, connecting you to your service, connecting you to the community, to give you many opportunities to learn from one another and learn from our guests as well. So for our closing, what we'd like to ask you to do is to reflect on some of the things that you heard today or thought about, and journal or draw something that represents a connection that you've made. And that can be a connection you made with another person, or it can be a connection between something that you learned and your service, a connection between two different topics that were brought up, and maybe you're seeing them intertwined or connected in a different way. It can really be anything, okay? So just something that stood out to you, a connection that stood out to you, okay? So I'm gonna pass out these little, or I'm gonna have somebody pass out these little half sheets, and we'll give you about 10 minutes to do that journaling. Are we ready? Did everyone get a chance to write something? Yes. Okay. I don't need this minute. Does anybody want to share their reflection? No pressure, but if anybody wants to, we'd love to hear some of the connections you made. Yeah, Danya.
So I drew a picture. It's kind of like a little diagram, and it does not sum everything up, but I tried to like simplify things. I drew a little baby smiling, and then an arrow to like an eye, and the eye is like seeing all the negative things going on in the community, so like violence, prostitution, gangs, and stuff like that. And then there's another arrow coming from the baby showing a person like by itself, or like a baby by itself, and then standing near like, that looks sad, standing near like 3 kids that are really happy. And that's to emphasize the like sense of not belonging and like low self-esteem and not believing in yourself. And then that points down to the original thing I drew of like seeing all the bad things happening. And then the last arrow is like a picture of a baby with a gun in its hand. And at the bottom, it's a lot happier. I wrote but, and then I drew a picture of a school and a light bulb to emphasize like how important the mind is, and like pushing it to like plant seeds of doubt in the society, rather than like thinking like, oh, this is the right way I need to go. And I put a list of like mentors, role models, belonging, self-esteem, and family involvement. And then the last arrow was like, it's still like a baby, but it's like in a business suit. So yeah, that's my reflection.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
So I wrote that we need to teach children that they are worthy. And then at the bottom I kind of wrote like home life, arrow, education, arrow, place in community, arrow, relationship with law enforcement. And I didn't know whether to do arrow or equal sign, because I think they're all connected, and I don't think it's necessarily like a linear thing that they all. And that was just mainly to say that, yeah, how many people think that it's like, oh, problem with just one area of life, where it's like, yeah, where it was kind of reinforced today that all of these problems in one area can result in a ripple of like affecting all other areas of your life. So it's important to reaffirm worthiness in all these areas. Positive representation.
Yes. So I drew the word teacher in the middle.
Wait,
and
speak
then
up a
I
little.
wrote on this side like what a teacher needs to do and what a teacher break stereotypes and be honest about like things. And a teacher is also a liberator and educator and supporter of their students.
Awesome, thank you for sharing. Anyone else want to share?
I was thinking about kind of like, I didn't draw anything, but I was just kind of reflecting about how systemic kind of these things that are propagated societally, and if we're not intentional with our language in the classroom, even if we're not intentionally doing anything to push these societal things forward, if we're not doing anything to go against them, we're sort of helping them, and not explicitly but implicitly. So I don't know, just being intentional about trying to break the system or the way that things are, because if you don't do anything at all, you're kind of just helping them.
Anybody else?
Just like of the most simple connections, like there are no black men in this room, and like ta-da, and like thinking about Cal, there are hardly any black men at Cal. I think that's like not even 1,000, and we are a school of like 30,000. So that is like the most simple tie I can make to like preschool and like with our students and why are we not at Cal.
Yeah, recruitment. Let's
Yeah,
get them
so
in here.
recruitment, without tokenizing, but
No, not tokenizing, but just like, yeah, having, like they were saying, more teachers that reflect, more police officers that reflect the community or understand the community, teachers that do the same thing. So I also want to encourage you guys to think about that in terms of, yeah, our core and what we're made of and diversifying us. Yeah, definitely. Sorry, I didn't mean to jump on that. Thanks for sharing. Anyone else want to share? Going once.
Right.
I noticed that it wasn't really just like the church working for.
What?
Let me get you a microphone. Hold on.
This was supposed to start at 2:30. Thank goodness they moved it back. Can you imagine just driving by the desk?
We just have to get louder to assert our dominance.
It's gonna be so worth it, right?
Check.
Yeah.
One thing I noticed was that it's not just like one entity working towards a better community, not just church, school, or like these community organizations, but they're all kind of working together, and I think that's the biggest benefit. Like that's what we're gonna like see the biggest change is all these organizations come together rather than like just law enforcement or just the schools. You know, it's good that everyone's coming together. So I think that's like the biggest change, or one of the biggest connections I saw, at least.
Great. Thanks for sharing.
You're welcome.
All right.
Anyone else? Anybody? Jessica, you swatting the fly? You're raising your hand.
Spotted a fly.
All right.
Great.
Well, the tuba has spoken.
Yes.
The fat lady is the sun is out. Evaluations.
Yeah. Do you want to do your announcements first? Or?
Yeah. Okay. Well, we have training on Tuesday. I'll see you all there. Dante, I think I said 2:15. It's a